FlyDigi are the self-proclaimed #1 manufacturer of controllers in China, and they're now expanding into Western markets, which means that their excellent controllers are now popping up in new places such as Amazon, including this one, the FlyDigi Direwolf 2. This is a budget controller that you can get for around $26 on AliExpress or just over around $30 on Amazon.com. And hopefully in this video you'll see why that is an absolute steal for this controller. I have actually been mainlining FlyDigi controllers for the last year or so, after a simple impulse buy of the FlyDigi Vader 3 Pro on Temu, which by the way to this day is my only Temu purchase. I immediately fell in love with this controller, and we'll get to a review of that soon, I promise, but for now I wanted to review the Direwolf 2. And FlyDigi did send this out to me to review. However, I have purchased 2 of their controllers in the past by myself, and of course all of my opinions are my own. But I just want to be totally upfront with you, I absolutely love this company's controllers, and I'm really excited to review the Direwolf 2. So let's take a look at the controller itself. And in general, this controller bears a similar shape to the Vader 3 Pro and the Xbox controller. And you might notice right away that the Direwolf 2 has a really great colorway, with this frosty white textured plastic, grey highlights, and these blue anti-friction rings. And there's just something about FlyDigi's design that I really like. It's extremely close to an Xbox controller, and yet it kind of has these accents that really give it a lot of character, such as these thick and chunky analog sticks, and the bowl-shaped D-pad, which believe me we'll be taking a closer look at in just a moment. The matte white color of the shell is really impressive and feels really high quality. And I really love the added effect of these glossy white lines. It's a subtle design, but it looks great all the same. In the depressed V at the top, you'll see the silver FlyDigi logo. And you might want to notice that there are no RGB lights on this controller at all. It's just this beautiful, frosty, confident color. And as soon as you hold this controller in your hands, you're also going to feel the dotted texture on the back of the grips. Once again, this feels ultra premium. And I really like how it's contained again by these glossy lines. And while we're looking at the back of this controller, you'll notice the M1 and M2 macro keys, which are totally programmable, and a simple flip switch for switching between the 2.4 GHz dongle mode, Bluetooth, and a Nintendo Switch mode. Before I take a look at the controls, let me go over a few of this controller's features. First of all, it does support a dongle which is included in the box, and will connect to a PC, Android, or iOS device using Bluetooth, or really any device that supports a Bluetooth controller. And finally, it has a Nintendo Switch mode, and everything you might expect to work on Switch does work on this controller. Every single aspect of this controller can be customized using the FlyDigi Space Station program, which we'll take a little bit of a look at later. This includes the pressure sensitivity of the triggers, the dead zones of the analog sticks, and my favorite feature, Universal Gyroscope. It also has a turbo function built in, and the ability to switch between 4 onboard profiles at a moment's notice. The controller will charge with USB-C, but you can also use a USB-C cable for a direct connection into your device. Well anyway, let's go ahead and take a closer look at the controls on the Direwolf 2. And we'll start with these analog sticks. Now I'm a huge fan of FlyDigi's, well, everything, but especially their analog sticks, because they have these really thick and chunky caps. And in general, I really love the texture of these, they feel great under the thumb, and this broad rubbery cap makes it really difficult for your finger to slip off even if you're playing an intense game. They're some of the most consistent and easy to use sticks I've ever seen. They're also combined with a very thick anti-friction ring, which gives the sticks a very smooth rotation around the outer edges. Now I've seen some people say that anti-friction rings are pointless and don't do anything, but I just want you to think for a moment about how that's not really possible. Physics dictates that if something smooth rubs against something rough, you're going to get a rough, frictiony response. If something smooth rubs against something smooth, it's going to be smoother. It's pretty simple. And it's definitely noticeable on this controller, just how smooth these analog sticks are. They of course click down for L3 and R3 nicely too. And in general, these sticks are just wonderful. They are Hall effect sensors as well, which, theoretically, means that they should never experience drift. The sticks feel nice and tensioned, and honestly, they're just absolutely great. They really, really are great. As for the face buttons, these are actually membrane-based, which is kind of unusual because most of FlyDigi's controllers actually have mechanical switch buttons. But for the Direwolf 2 you get membrane buttons, but they are very, very nice all the same. They have a great amount of travel and they're very tactile and thunky. In fact, they're very clicky in general, even though they're membrane based. A lot of the time on these third-party controllers, the B button hasn't been shaped properly, and it kind of slips down into the shell. But thankfully on this controller that's not the case, and the buttons stick up plenty even when you press them down. I would say these have about 1.5mm to 2mm of travel, and in general they just feel really, really nice. And I'm a big fan of the glossy texture combined with the light grey labels. They just look and they feel great. And now it's time to look at the D-pad. Now here's the thing, I am usually not a fan, or at least I wasn't a fan of bowl-shaped D-pads in the past. But actually FlyDigi's D-pad is one of this company's most defining features, and it is, well, super crispy and amazing. What do I mean exactly by crispy? Well, just take a listen for yourself. This special D-pad is an 8-way hybrid D-pad which FlyDigi created in-house themselves. And it is really, really unique. Each direction is a very light mouse-like click, and the whole D-pad itself almost kind of slides around. Now if you look at it from the bottom, you'll notice that it does in fact pivot, but when it's under your thumb, it's so broad and wide that it kind of feels like it's sliding. But the thing is with this D-pad is that it is incredibly accurate and easy to use. In fact, FlyDigi's D-pads are the only type that don't generally fatigue my thumb over a long period of time. And that's simply because your thumb doesn't rub against any hard edges and it doesn't need to make any broad sweeping movements to hit different directions. I tend to use this D-pad in two different ways. Either I keep my thumb planted squarely in the center and simply just kind of rock the whole thing around, or I slide my thumb between the four directions. And either way that I use this D-pad, I find it to be absolutely completely laser accurate. No matter whether you're playing a tight platforming game or a fighting game that expects really precise inputs, this D-pad delivers every single time, with every single button press. It's actually bafflingly amazing, and I would have never expected that I would be a convert to bowl-shaped D-pads. And in general actually, I don't really like them usually, but FlyDigi's design is absolutely phenomenal. This D-pad has changed D-pads for me forever, and actually it's better than any other I have ever used in my life. Now actually the three FlyDigi controllers I have do all use the same circular D-pad design, but they all feel slightly different. The Vader 3 Pro is certainly my favorite because it's a little more subtle, whereas the Direwolf here is very, very clicky. But all the same, I find this D-pad to be absolutely fantastic. However, I would say that the loudness and the clickiness of the D-pad does kind of take a little bit of time to get used to, because even with your game audio out loud, you can definitely hear the clickiness of this D-pad. When I say this, I'm just being honest with you, because I do think that some people are going to not necessarily like how loud it is. It is absolutely not a problem with me, and I absolutely love it. I would not change this D-pad for the world. It is absolutely the best D-pad on anything I've ever used. And honestly, I think that everybody should give it a try. It is just amazing. The rest of the buttons on the face of the device are the Select, Start, Home, and Function button. And these are all just clicky switches and they're just fine. They're not too loud at all. And as if I weren't gushing enough over the D-pad, let's go ahead and take a look at the shoulder buttons. L1 and R1 on this controller have a beautiful dotted texture on top that feels great under the thumb and is very tactile. The buttons themselves are nice, clicky, tactile switches, but they have a kind of lighter response. They're very, very easy to press. And I have no complaints about them whatsoever. They feel great, the texture is great, and they're very responsive. And now let's talk about the triggers. And FlyDigi's triggers are another element of their controller that I absolutely think is best in class. And there's a very simple reason for that. Of course, these are Hall effect triggers. They have a dotted texture on the top, and they have this really, really lovely curved shape that your finger just naturally wraps around. They're flared upwards in a way that cradles your finger very comfortably. So you're probably wondering what it is about these triggers that make them so much better than others. And it all comes down to impact dampening. I just made that term up, but it should make sense. Basically, when you push these triggers down all the way quickly, it's actually a soft finish to the push. It's not a loud, clacky plastic on plastic impact. It's actually soft, like it's been cushioned somewhat, and it makes these triggers extremely quiet, kind of ironic given the D-pad. But it also means that you don't get this kind of sharp impact when you push the button down quickly. Here's a quick comparison of the Direwolf 2's trigger impact versus a different controller that doesn't have this. The difference here is night and day, and it's one thing about this controller that is really noticeable when you're using it. There's something about this cushioned impact that just feels really comfortable. Also, the triggers here are incredibly accurate in their response. The travel of the trigger is 9mm, which is good because it means that you don't need to move your fingers a whole lot to go from not pressing it at all to a full press. But each actuation level, from 0 to 255, is less than 0.1mm. Essentially what that means is that this trigger is incredibly accurate, and the pressure sensitivity is noticeably good. And of course it can be fully customized in their app as well. I just want to say before I finish up this trigger section, I cannot stress enough that these are the best in class triggers I've ever used, and they're the same as on other FlyDigi controllers too. The only controller I've used with better triggers than this one is the Vader 3 Pro. Anyway, the last two inputs on this controller particularly are the M1 and M2 macro keys on the back of the controller. These sit perfectly under your middle fingers, and they have a nice amount of pressure needed to activate them. Not too much at all, but you definitely have to consciously push them. You're not going to hit them by accident. And you can also record your macro and save it to one of these buttons on the controller itself without the need for software, which is always a great feature. The last thing I'll mention about this controller in the hands before we look at some of its expanded features is that it is very light in weight, and it only weighs 195 grams. And that's despite having dual rumble motors and a large 800 mAh battery inside as well. It's really impressive stuff. In-game, the Direwolf 2 is just a really reliable companion, and it works perfectly for heavy use of the analog sticks, triggers, and shoulders, or for more retro games that require the D-pad or accurate D-pad input. Usually I find that a controller has to do one or the other. It has to be really good for modern games or really good for retro games. And there's generally some compromise in either direction depending on the focus of the controller. But that's definitely not the case with the Direwolf 2. The D-pad is so amazing, the face buttons are so responsive, and the triggers and analog sticks are perfectly responsive too. It's just a joy of a controller to use. Anyway, let's take a look at some of the expanded features that you get with the Direwolf 2. First of all is Turbo Mode. Simply hold down the circle button and then press any button that you like, and that button will enter Turbo Mode. You can then hold down the circle button while pushing the left stick left and right to increase or decrease the turbo speed. And then you can press the circle button and that same button again to disable turbo. Really easy to set up. To record a macro to the back buttons, you can long press the circle button for 3 seconds, and then it will enter recording mode. Once you're in recording mode, just press the buttons you want to be included in your macro, and then press the M1 or M2 key to save it. You can then hold the circle button and press M1 or M2 to clear that macro. Finally, on the device itself, you can adjust the vibration strength. Just hold down the circle button and move the stick up or down to change the vibration strength. And actually, before I move on, the FlyDigi vibration motor setup is really good too. It's not HD rumble or anything like that, but in general I find that the vibration of this controller is kind of a deep vibration inside the controller and not that kind of loud buzzy kind that some cheaper controllers have. And yeah, it feels great. Another feature that is of course on board with this controller is Gyroscope. If you're in Nintendo Switch mode and you connect this controller to the Switch, your gyroscope will respond exactly how you expect it to with any other controller. However, you can also set this gyroscope up to work globally in any game on PC, Android, or whatever. To set this up, you'll need the FlyDigi Space Station 3 software. It has to be version 3 and not version 2 for the Direwolf 2. But once you're in this program, it's pretty easy to set up. With your controller connected to your PC with a dongle, you'll get this screen here. And you can basically just customize this any way that you like. For gyroscope in particular, you'll click on motion sensing, and you'll have two options here, FPS mode or racing mode. And these basically determine how exactly the gyroscope responds. With FPS mode, the gyroscope will respond as you move the controller around, which makes a lot more sense for aiming purposes such as in an FPS game. Racing mode will respond when you actually tilt the controller, which is much more like a steering wheel. You can then choose which analog stick, or yes indeed the mouse, that you'd like to map the gyroscope to, adjust its sensitivity and dead zone, and then you can configure how you turn the gyroscope on and off and which buttons you press to trigger it. All in all, this is just a really amazing way to configure your gyroscope. You can then click on the Test tab to test the gyroscope itself, and of course all your other inputs too. While we're here in the software, let's take a closer look at it. On the left hand side you'll see onboard config. You can rename these, import them, and export them. And there are 4 configs available which you can flip between on the controller itself anytime that you want. On the Home tab, you're going to get a basic look at the general setup of your controller, and you can click any of the buttons here to go to that specific tab and customize it more. The Button tab will let you customize and remap any button on this controller to any other button, and that includes Start and Select and the analog stick clicks too. However, it goes even further than that, because on this tab you can set up any button to use a permanent turbo mode, or set any button on this controller to a macro, which you can then set up in this app specifically. So yeah, this is a controller where you can set any button up to behave exactly how you want it to, either as a different button or as a complete macro. It's pretty impressive. And while we're on the topic of macros, I mean, these are just so detailed, it's crazy. You can set your macro to trigger once when you press the button, to trigger repeatedly until you press the button again, or to repeat while you hold the button down. And then you can simply push the buttons you want on your controller to start coding in the macro. And then you can start to fiddle with the delay between each button press. I'm not a huge macro user myself, but if you're the kind of person that needs in-depth macros that are simple to set up but complex in nature, you're gonna love this setup. It's so easy to use. The Joystick tab will let you adjust the behavior of the analog sticks, the left and the right stick, their dead zone, and their sensitivity curve. You can either use one of a few built-in, or you can set it to custom to set up your own response graph. The Trigger tab will let you adjust the response of your triggers. Finally, the General tab will let you adjust the vibration strength of the controller or turn it off completely. If you click Function Settings in the bottom left of the program, you can change when the controller will sleep after being inactive, for example from 1 minute all the way up to 3 hours or never. By the way, if you click on Switch Mode config on the top of the app, you'll move into Switch Mode, and this gives you all the same functionality to customize your controller, only when it's connected to the Switch instead of a PC via the dongle. The only thing you miss out here is of course gyroscope customization because of the nature of the Switch, but it's pretty rare to get such a customizable controller that also works on Nintendo Switch. By the way, in case you forgot, everything that we just looked at is available in a controller that is $26. That is absolutely phenomenal. And well, honestly, that's the FlyDigi Direwolf 2. This is a controller that is available at an ultra budget price that gives you a very premium build, ultra premium controls, and ultra premium customization too. If you're looking for a controller that's under around $30, you literally cannot go wrong with the Direwolf 2. I think that this is an absolutely phenomenal controller, and FlyDigi have once again proved to me that they make the best controllers on the market, period. So if you're in the market for a new budget controller, this is the one to buy. And by the way, I'm not going to do a likes and dislikes on this particular review, because there isn't a single thing about this controller that I dislike. I love everything about it. Well, I kind of wish it worked with the FlyDigi dock, but that's the only thing. This is actually the first in 3 FlyDigi reviews I have coming up. The next one will be the FlyDigi Vader 3 Pro, which is my favorite gamepad of all time. And it just has a few quality of life and extra features that make it better than the Direwolf 2. After that I have the Apex 3 Elite to review, which is a whole different ballgame, and we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. If you want to check any of these controllers out, I'll leave links to Amazon and AliExpress where you can pick them up. Be sure to check for any coupons on Amazon before you buy, because there's often ones available that will lower the price substantially. And if you do pick one up, let me know in the comment box below what you think about it. I'd love to hear your thoughts because I absolutely love it. And also, be sure to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to Retro Breeze so you don't miss my upcoming FlyDigi reviews. And of course my other retro handheld content. And that's this one done. Thank you very much for watching Retro Breeze, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.